Hello class, welcome back to the week 11 material, and here in the second segment we're going to explore how to actually create files on the remote server, including Python files, and how to run said Python files. So hopefully you Mac users still have the terminal in the dock so that you can just simply click on that. And you might be wondering, how in the world might I remember the command that we just typed earlier? One of the nice things about the command line interface is you can access previous commands by hitting the up arrow key. So by hitting the up arrow key multiple times, you can actually go back to multiple different commands. So here I'm just hitting the up arrow key once to recall the SSH command that we typed in. So if you do the same, you should be able to recall that command. That'll save you from having to type out the same thing over and over again. And then here we won't get that warning anymore because we just don't get the warning anymore. Warning about logging into a server that we've never logged onto before. So since we've already logged onto it once, then we don't have to worry about that warning popping up. So now that we're back on the server, I'll go ahead and explore how to actually create files. So one of the nice things about the class server is we have a program called Genie, or some people pronounce it Genie, which is a nice graphical user interface sort of application that allows us to put text into a file. So the way we access Genie is we type Genie or Genie, as some people may pronounce it, and then we follow that up with a space, and then after that space we put the name of the file that we want to create or the name of the file that we want to modify. So here I'm just going to say example.py, Genie example.py, and then if I hit enter, I'll run that command. And you'll see some stuff popping up again. The main thing that you want to look for is if this actually shows up. And I'm going to go ahead and close out of some of these other files here so you can actually see what this should look like. So again, this is probably going to look a lot, the text is going to look a lot larger on my screen than it is on yours because I want to make sure that it's actually readable. But you can see that when we run that Genie command, we do get a display that opens. And now we can just put text in here like we would any other text editor. And you may also notice that we have a .py at the end of the file name, which is consistent with what we had earlier when we were creating a Python file. And one of the really nice things about Genie is it will color code everything based on the file type that you give it. So here it will color code everything just like it would in Spider. So all the print statement, you can see it bolded it and give it a different color so that you can see what the actual Python keywords are being contained in there. And as we'll see later on when we work with HTML files, it does the same thing for HTML files. As long as you have the dot something at the end of there, it will automatically recognize how to actually color the contents of the file. But here we'll just run a nice simple Python program that will just print something out. You see the quoted stuff is orange in Genie, in Spider it's green, and the print statement is this indigo or dark blue color, whereas in Spider it was a magenta color. Now, one thing that's important to keep in mind is when you go to create the file, well, you can see right now, as I was typing stuff in, you notice that this turned red right here. The text in this tab turned red, which indicates that the file is not saved. And you also see an asterisk pop up at the top here to indicate that files are not saved. This right here is a save icon, so you just simply click on that, and you can see the asterisk disappears, and this goes back to being the black text or the dark gray text that it was to begin with. Now, so we created a really simple, super simple Python program that just prints out some text. So now the question becomes, how do we actually run it? Now, first we're going to have to go back to the command line, but you may notice that it can't seem to type any commands out here. So what we're going to have to do first is we're going to have to close out of Genie first, close out of it, and then that gives us the command line back. And then from there, we can type the command to actually run the file. And the way we do that is we type Python, all lowercase, space, and the name of the program that we actually want to run, which in this case is just example.py. And also, just like Python, the command line is case sensitive, so whatever is lowercase needs to be lowercase, whatever is uppercase needs to be uppercase. If the consistency is not perfect, then the computer is not going to recognize what you're trying to do. So for example, if I try Python example with a capital E, it'll say no such file or directory, versus when it's all lowercase, there you can see it actually ran the program. So to sort of draw an analogy to what we were working with earlier, when we were working with Spider, we had the editor window and we had the console. You can sort of think of this as G_any being the editor window where you go to write your program, and then the command line or the terminal is your console. So you'll get the results of your program by typing out this command, and then whatever gets printed out will appear in the command line in sort of a really nice and simple fashion. One thing I'll also go ahead and recommend about the G_any command is when you have the window open, it's a good idea to make sure you're constantly saving. The server has this sort of, I guess you could almost call an evil feature, where if you have the G_any window open for too long, it will actually terminate the session. It will terminate the G_any session, and anything that is unsaved will be gone. So make sure you're constantly hitting it. This is just sort of a failsafe on the server to make sure that you're not consuming too much of the server's processing power and memory. So if you have G_any open for too long, it will terminate it at some point. So just make sure that you're constantly saving and that you don't stay in G_any for too long. And I'm also going to go ahead and demonstrate a common mistake that I see a lot that involves this Python command. If you type Python without a file name, this is the result that you're going to get back. And you may notice that things look a little bit different now. Instead of having the M, the tilde, the bracket, and the $sign, I have 3 greater than symbols off to the left-hand side. What you basically do by typing Python without a file name is you basically access a command line interface that only takes in Python commands. So if I say I want to go edit that file I created before, well, invalid syntax. That looks a lot like a Python error, is because it's expecting Python commands to be typed in here. If you encounter this situation where you accidentally type Python without a file name and you see the 3 greater than symbols to the left-hand side of the screen, the way you get out of that, there's 2 ways. One, you can type exit followed by a set of empty parentheses and then hit enter. Or a faster way to address that is just to hold down the control key and hit D, and that'll bring you back to the regular command line. Now, another thing that you may have caught on to is it seems like a really tedious process to constantly be opening G_any, modifying the program, closing it out, running it. Oh, it doesn't work. Open it again, close it, open it, close it. You might be wondering if there's an easier way to do that. And there is. And it's a very similar command to what we had earlier. So it's going to be G_any example.py. And then at the very end of that, I'm going to add a space and a little ampersand symbol. You get it by holding down the Shift key and pressing the 7 key. If you do that, it will open the G_any window like I did before, but it will preserve the command line. That way I can continue to type in commands even while the graphical display is open. If you don't include the ampersand, then you have to close the graphical display before you can type additional commands into the command line. So this way I can simultaneously edit the program and also run it without having to close the graphical display and reopen it and close it and just continue that tedious cycle over and over again. So this ampersand is a really nice tool that makes your life a lot easier when you're editing files on the server. And here I can just go ahead and demonstrate something else. So I'll just say, instead of hello world, I'll say hello class with an exclamation mark. Now I'm going to go back over here and try running the program again. Python example.py. If this confuses you, I would actually go ahead and say pause the video and try to figure out why in the world we got this output instead of this. So the answer to the question that I just posed is because the reason why we got this output is because we did not save this file. When you make the change here, you've got to save the file in order for the changes to actually take effect. That's why we got the old output here, because if you don't save the file, then when you run this Python command, it's going to run the old version of the file. We want to run the updated version, then we have to save it first. Then we run the Python command to get the new result. So that's something to keep in mind, is before you go to run the program, make sure you save it first. Otherwise, when you go to run it, it's going to run an older version of your program, and that may or may not be a confusing result. So again, I'll go ahead and reiterate something that I said earlier because it's really important. the way that you create new files is the same exact way that you would modify or change the contents of a file. So I'll go ahead and close out a GNE to sort of demonstrate what exactly I mean by that. So if you want to edit the contents of a file, you use GNE, and then you type the name of the file that you want to edit, and then I'll go ahead and include the ampersand again, and that will open the file up for you to edit. But if you want to create a different file, if you want to create a new and edit a new file, you type GNE and then the name of the file that you want to create. So I'll call this one another example.py, and then again include the ampersand. And here you can see, once it pulls up, you can see it does in fact create a different file by the name that I gave right here on the other side of the GNE command. And I'll go ahead and hit the enter key to bring back the command line. That's one thing that's mildly annoying about GNE is even when you use the ampersand, it looks like the command line interface is lost, but if you hit the enter key once, it should bring it right back. And sometimes you'll get these annoying error messages, but again, you don't have to worry about the errors or the warnings in here as long as the graphical display actually opens. And here I can put another super simple Python program. So here I'll put something that involves arithmetic, so something like that. And again, make sure I save it before I attempt to run it. And then Python another example.py. And there you can see it runs that program and we get a result back. So you might also be wondering, do I have to memorize all the files that I use the GNE command on? Is there any way I can actually look at all the files that I've created so far? The answer to that question is yes. There is a way to view all the files that you've created so far, and that's where the ls command enters the story. First, let me close out a GNE. And then come back here. The ls command basically lists out all the files in the current directory. I'll talk more about directories in the next segment, but for right now, the ls command will show you all the files that you have in your current directory. And I have a lot more files because I've had a lot more time on the server, but you should see at the very least the two files that we created. So another example, an example.py, those should show up as long as you actually save them. And that way you don't have to memorize every single file that you create on the server. The computer remembers that information. You just have to know how to access it. And the way you access it is the ls command. And sort of an extension of that is ls space hyphen ltr. That will print out a more detailed list of your files. And it'll look something like this, where it will sort everything based on how recently the file was edited. So whatever was edited most recently will appear towards the bottom. Whatever was edited more distantly will appear towards the top. And another trick that you can do with the ls command is something like this, where if you're only interested in a specific file type, you can type ls*.py. Basically how this works is when the computer sees an asterisk, it reads this as anything that ends in .py. So it means that anything can go in place of this asterisk and then a .py after that, as long as there's any file or anything matching that sort of format, something that ends in .py, then it will print out that information and only that information. So it's a really good way to filter out information that you may not be interested in. So if you're only interested in all the Python files that you have, then you can type something like ls*.py. Or if maybe you're interested in all the files that begin with the letter A, then you can set it up like this, where I want anything, I want to list out anything that begins with an A, and anything can go in place of this asterisk. And you can see it does in fact do that. And it also did something with the accounts directory. But we'll talk more about directories in the next segment. But for now, that's just sort of a first look of how you can open files, create files, and edit files on the command lines interface and on a remote server. So in the next segment, we'll talk more about directories, how to create them, and how to navigate from one directory to the next.